in, so I apologize.
I know. So I let everybody know. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Bert, again, thank you very much. We're going to kind of dive right in. We'll continue the Ask the Experts. I want to tee this up for a moment and then we'll dive right in. One of the reasons why we thought it would be interesting to do this webinar slash webcast is so many of our projects that we do from a revenue recognition, leasing, even a treasury perspective, often run into issues and challenges with data and data management. And the guys who really are the experts here, and even SAP has relied on as our friends from DigitalRoute. So Bert, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us, and we'll dive right in. So with that in mind, I just want to remind everybody that the session is being recorded. For those of you on here, feel free to ask any questions you want throughout the process. And again, check out our other webinars, other content that's available, whether it's on the website, Apple iTunes, or YouTube. So, you know, Bert, when you and I were teeing this whole thing up and we talked about, and in fact, about 3 years ago, hard to believe that COVID has lasted and affected us that long, but about 3 years ago, I did a talk about S4HANA and S4HANA migration, and about 50 to 70 people, somewhere in that ballpark, joined us for a discussion of digital debt. And I wanted to tee this up because what is digital debt? And I'm going to ask you, Bert, if this resonates for you and what you're seeing. But you know, I know it's kind of a funny picture here, but you know, if your infrastructure looks like this, your business processes maps look like this, or your data lake reminds you or looks like this lake, it's probably because you have digital debt and you're involved in paralytic or stuck with paralytic business models. And a lot of that is result of issues and challenges you have with infrastructure. You maybe have created through the period of years Z tables for special data. You have user exits. You're using tons of bodies and boppies. You have old base with no limited upgrades. Your business processes look like this, and more importantly, your data. And your data is old, unused. You have multiple data sources with multiple data formats. Perhaps it's corrupted, it's insufficient, incomplete, or they're highly customized data fields. And this prevents you from moving forward. Bert, you guys are data experts. You deal with these kinds of things all the time. Does this resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Yeah, I think that it's a big list. We see companies all the time that, of course, through just normal difficulty of evolving their IT landscape, they have older systems, but it's much worse in many cases where growth through, say, acquisition or even internally lines of business starting out on their own and not really unifying with the existing infrastructure and starting to end up with processes and data that's quite distributed and kind of stuck together in ad hoc ways. And after maybe one simple turn of that crank, things are not too bad, but we see a number of situations where there have been multiple turns of that crank, and it starts to look like this picture in the middle, where both from a data and business process viewpoint, things are a little bit out of control, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can go. I like that you said you can get there through mergers and acquisitions, divestitures. So often we also see customers, our clients, who say, well, I created this initial transaction for a special customer because they were special. And then every customer turned out to be special. And you end up with differences, right?
Yes, marketing is very creative is a phrase that I hear often by the billing people.
Yeah, we are. We tend to be very creative people, which is our job, but that's not always helpful when it comes to things like information and data, is it?
Yes, challenges there.
Yeah. So the reason why we came together, and one of the key aspects of where we're going is our relationship to the BRIM portfolio. And as everybody knows or should know here, SAP has a solution that addresses this idea of the digital solutions economy or subscription models. And when we talk about the subscription model, we're really talking about not just subscriptions. Subscriptions are the Zawara phase. They're the old style. That's just subscriptions. We're talking about the kinds of things like XASS, anything as a service. Think of what SAP is doing, right, with RISE. It's about entitlements. There's so many different of these models. And because of these models and the data type processes that are driven, you need a way to think about that. And why that's important is as we move to these models, we also see the customer experience changing, where customers want to drive the process, whether it's through engagement, creating real-time solutions, driving flexibility through delivery and fulfillment, unified billing and invoicing, flexible payments, and then they want security of that data. And this is a model that we've been using, and we know that SAP, together with Bramasol, has created this circle approach or this cyclical approach, but it's not a cycle per se. It's multiple on-ramps. And if you think of it as these multiple data interfaces, underlying all of this, of course, is the idea of data integrity and data integration, if you will, and mediation provided by our friends from DigitalRoute. And Bert, I know, when we've met with people before, this model resonates for not just them, but for customers as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. We see a lot of really a tremendous digital revolution as there's more and more digital data available. Companies in all verticals looking at digital services, and if they're in the B2C space, looking at just really changing and different attitudes and demands from the consumer base. And all of those are driving these models that as you're calling out here, and customers want control, they want on-demand services, they want multiple channels to interact with the business and methods of payment, and so all of those things are driving into the model. And then as you get those demands on the front end, all of the processes here in the wheel have to be adapted to those.
Exactly, and it's the idea of unifying data, and we're going to talk about that in a moment because we're going to spend our time on that. But we talk about the SAP solutions here, but we know that so many different companies don't use just SAP. We'd like them to, but for commerce solutions, many of them will use homegrown commerce solutions. Organizations, like Google and Apple and Discovery and others, where part of their DNA is about that solution, but they also use tools like Salesforce and other CPQ tools, as well as CPQ tools here, right? It could be a SAP tool, it could be homegrown, it could be others. And I think all of that, you might be using Venmo or another digital payments technology. All of that data has to be unified, right, Bert?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so in any evolution toward BRIM, we see the BRIM billing solution and its components really plays extremely well to this theme of introducing new business models or getting a handle on modernizing the legacy infrastructure in complex businesses. And in that dance, there's always the challenges of how to bolt BRIM into the existing landscape. Right. And the landscape both in terms of what kind of front-end systems there are, and often they're SAP systems, but there's also other portals, legacy portals or CRMs that are involved. And then in the back office, of course, the support systems, service delivery systems, all of these non-SAP componentry that have to contribute data to the financial back end. And the role of convergent mediation there is to capture that data in those external systems and make sure that it's clean and transformed and ready to feed into those financial systems of record in the back office.
Great. Yeah. So I'm glad you said that, because let's dive into that for a moment. So Bert, why don't let's take a moment. I'm going to let you in a moment introduce yourself and DigitalRoute. And as we go through here, what I'd like to do in our discussion, the meat of what we want to talk about, is focus on 3 areas that I kind of gleaned when I did my homework on your website, which were, we think of data mediation, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about what it is, what DigitalRoute does, but it's all about the benefits and how do you do that. And so we'll dive into that, but let's take a moment. Bert, tell us a little bit more about yourself and tell us about DigitalRoute and what is convergent mediation.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So from an introduction to myself, I'm a pre-sale solution consultant. I've been with DigitalRoute for 8 years now, and so I have a long history with this data problems and data mediation. I have a background in telecom billing. I worked for companies in the telecom space in particular, which DigitalRoute has a heritage there as well. And then in a previous life, I'm a technologist. I have a PhD in computer science, and I was a university professor before
Call you
coming
Dr.
into.
Bert now?
You can call me Dr. Bert if you like. Yes. So that's my background and my perspectives. In terms of DigitalRoute, DigitalRoute is a company that grew up in the telecom space. It started around the turn of the millennium, and it really brought forward an innovative product there for telecom billing, which is a very challenging space. The data is very complex. Getting billing data off of telecom equipment and switches is a very complex world, lots of timing issues, lots of volume. So all those challenges, DigitalRoute's product architecture really was a disruptive approach to that. At one point, DigitalRoute captured 25% of the telecom billing space through partners and channels. It's based in Stockholm, so it has a Nordic perspective and long-term relationships there with Ericsson and Nokia and equipment manufacturers. But in the last decade, DigitalRoute has really pivoted toward a wider focus and into a wider set of industries outside of telecom. And convergent mediation is the SAP product that's been a part of the Brim quote-to-cash suite for 10 years now. It is our core technology adapted to the SAP Brim billing space, and we have penetrated there many industry verticals and many large customers around that. So we emphasize the use case around capturing usage data for usage-based billing models, so raw data for charging in consumption-based billing plans. But in practice, there are many types of data, transactions and master data that are needed in order to put these solutions in place. And the flexibility of convergent mediation plays well in that area.
So I'm going to ask another, dive into another question that came up prior to this. But with DigitalRoute, like ourselves, I have a 15-year background from telco, spending time at AT&T. Telco is great. I mean, obviously, lots of complex billing arrangements, complex billing issues and activity, particularly when it relates to both telcos that have, in the old days, you had long distance, wireless, and local, and you had to do all of those differently because some of them were market-based, some of them were regulated industries, and all of them had different regulations and taxes, and you had to bring all that data together. But in today's world, where so many different companies are creating ratable or usage-based models, we take a look at our standards, right? We talk about telco, of course, media is doing that. Software companies like SAP or McAfee or Autodesk or many other companies that we work a lot with all have those issues. How does mediation, even in an industry where you might have not just subscriptions and usage-based data, but maybe you have data that comes from other sources, such as services-based data, right? You have service-based data that might be based on a plan, comes from one location or system to another. How does DigitalRoute and Convergent Mediation help you rationalize and harmonize that data?
Yeah, good formulation of the problem, really. So convergent mediation is certainly used widely to capture raw metering data that is linked to consumption-based data plans. So as you mentioned, for example, SAP drinks its own champagne. It uses convergent mediation with the Brim billing stack to sell consumption-based services that are increasingly available in its software as a service offerings in clouds. So the role of mediation is the classic role of going out and touching the different systems that are, if you're buying hosted HANA capabilities, then there is some capture of things like CPU usage or memory or disk consumption, maybe compute time in some cases. So there's some raw data somewhere that that indicates the usage, and mediation captures that usage, and then cleans it up and enriches it, makes sure that the identifiers that came from the raw usage are mapped to identifiers that are used in the back-end financial systems. So it does dynamic lookups into product or customer information and produces a golden record that then Brim Billing can use for its purposes of starting the pricing and really pricing to a general ledger, all of the functionality that's provided by Brim, both billing and financial accounting, revenue recognition. And it turns out that that same process of capturing data and doing the type of cleansing, dynamic enrichments, any sort of transformation or merging of data to create the proper business objects, that same flow is exactly the same if, say, you're receiving priced invoices from a legacy billing system that you have in your environment, or partners are sending over transactions that they have captured to sign up people for your service. The same data management functionality of capture and cleanse, enrich, transform, merge, forward into SAP back office are all in play, and convergent mediation is very purpose-built toward that functionality.
And you mentioned the usage based, and of course you talked about applications we think of like virtual machines or dynamic space allocation as you go through companies that maybe are using, let's say they're using SAP to do financial close. Well, if it's a dynamic model, they're probably low usage during the middle of the quarter, but as they get to the end of the quarter or the end of the year, you might see a lot more usage, and all of that information would come into a tool like DigitalRoute, Convergent Mediation, and allow us to understand and rationalize, harmonize, enhance that data so you can produce one I'll call it almost a single view of the customer's relationship from a billing usage perspective, right?
Absolutely, and even maybe one step further is that It's very common in these deployments, as with SAP IT, for example, that the mediation captures data in real time. Basically, as soon as that data is available, it can get that. And because mediation was designed to be a bidirectional tool, it can actually pass the data to the charging engine and get the response in real time to see what values charging has assigned. And in that particular deployment, mediation is used then to route that priced information into portals that are used for both operationally to understand the consumption going on in the services, but also expose that out to customers so that they get a sense of where they are in their consumption costs for the month with near real time. And so that's that kind of visibility into data and capture in real time and the ability to push it out. That can be a tremendous value add for your customers in terms of offering these types of services.
Yeah, no, that's great. And of course, you talked about, again, we go back to the telco days where we were dealing with switches. Of course, I come from a AT&T background, so we're, back in the day it was called the 5 ESS switch, but you had switching, you had PBXs, right?
Yeah.
Being an Avaya guy, right? You had all of that, all of the different Definity and all of the different switches, which are now being used also both virtually, but it could also be used for any IoT application, right?
Oh, absolutely. We see quite a bit of IoT activity where there's a large amount of very raw data being produced somewhere, and one of the capabilities that mediation is valuable is as an aggregation layer. It has a very flexible capability to bring in related data and aggregate it either on time or event boundaries to create a more meaningful billable record for the back office, financial record for the back office to work with, and a lot of interesting applications in that area.
And your relationship with AT&T, goodness gracious, SAP makes that kind of a natural fit for anybody who's working in an SAP environment, because I think you would have sort of a very natural understanding or an innate understanding of the back end, as you say. What is it that SAP requires, whether it's the GL and the financials or a tool, our expertise being lease management or, quite frankly, revenue accounting, putting that information into the format and structures required for RevRec to build the RAI items and the revenue contracts and everything is something you're familiar with, right?
Yes, absolutely, and we definitely see the type of innovation that's coming in these business models are bringing challenges on the accounting back office side, and again, SAP, of course, is perfectly positioned as a leader in that space, and and a trusted advisor to many customers. So there's a good conversation that can happen there, and these capabilities can be brought to bear in these innovation scenarios with good effect. So I think that.
Do you find that sometimes the back end is kind of an afterthought at times, where they're spending so much time, and we'll talk about the customer experience, because of course customer experience is enormous, but you also have to be able to then gather. So I gather all of this data from a customer experience perspective, but then what do I do with it, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's everybody's in the business, and we see if you're really trying to push something new around service-based or usage-based offerings on the front end, there's a lot of problems to solve there, and a lot of focus on that. And as the data management layer, we're a bit of the glue between those operational activities and the back office. But on the back office side, those new ideas about how offerings are put out and therefore things like more complex bundling and revenue recognition issues. There's a whole team there that is fully aware of those problems, and sometimes those two sets of people are not highly connected, at least not initially in these experiences.
Well, thanks. So let's dive into, we talked about, and I think out of your website, hopefully I gleaned the right stuff here, right? But you know, we talked about, number one is it's all about customer experience, and I'm going to ask you in a moment, Bert, to talk about your experiences and some of um, the things that people ought to keep in mind, the challenges or items they might want to keep in mind. But we know customers are demanding more. They can react. You know, I pulled this up off a website. You can react almost instantaneously to any experience you might have. Customers want you to be able to tie their experiences together. You know, I think of my experiences on different sites, whether it's Amazon, Apple, eBay, various book sites. I'm a woodworker, so I go on to all of these different sites, and they're able to either track me because they know who I am and suggest things, or even anonymously they go through that process of suggesting, you know, customers like you who bought this kind of a saw also bought this kind of a file to sharpen their saws, right? You know, all of that comes. And of course, then the business needs to be able to have inputs to tailor these offers either dynamically through multiple channels, right? So we have, not only do we have customers coming in from multiple places with multiple relationships, but on the other end, you have sales face-to-face. You might have inside sales. You might have a customer service center. You might have just the website. Or, of course, and we'll talk about some of the issues and challenges around revenue sharing models, wherein all of this data needs to be harmonized, if you will. What are you seeing from your perspective in some of the challenges we see customers facing, and how does convergent mediation help us solve that?
Yeah. So a lot of, as we referred to briefly before, a lot of demand on the customer side for richer experiences, more connected experiences, and looking for that. And one thing I would call out that I've seen is the idea of being able to sign up for a service on demand. So if there's a service that isn't used very often, but it's a service that a consumer might know about, such as, say, roadside assistance for your car. Consumers want apps that provide that type of service, but they might want to download the app when they have their first incident and actually sign up and then start using the service immediately. And that's a very challenging business requirement in the sense of being able to allocate a new account around essentially partially anonymous consumer, depending on how they contact, how much information comes through on their first contact, and then being able to compute say an initial price. If you sign up at this subscription, then this event of towing your car 100 miles will cost this amount for you, and that kind of thing. So that's an example of a really challenging type of experience. But the role that convergent mediation plays there is just being able to handle data coming in from all different types of sales channels and information flow from the front end. So if it's coming through an app gateway or a cloud portal, or even a traditional call center where customers are calling in and allowing the call center representative to be able to push a button on their screen and make a real-time call to the back office and have that kind of interaction with the billing and financial systems. So we've encountered those types of applications.
Yeah, I remember the days of virtual call centers. So yeah.
Yes. And then the other thing I would say is definitely a lot of we see a lot of experiences where handling data in real time and transforming it and capturing it is the role of convergent mediation, but it's not just the charging stream that wants the data. Some
Right.
version of that gets distributed to external elements that do some sort of analysis on the service for sales purposes, and sometimes that's in real time. So again, with B2B consumption-based services, there can be sales analysis going on to see if a large account is reaching thresholds during the month and they would like to move to the next package and avoid bill shock. So that is
Funny you
definitely.
say that, because our next topic is about insights and analysis, right?
Well, there we go.
Right. So, we're certainly very familiar with, as the leaders in SAP, revenue, revenue recognition, revenue accounting, um, you know, and BRIM, as we grow our BRIM practice and continue to do that. But, revenue recognition big for us, right? Because you have all of these different streams that are coming together, and I need a single picture of that. But even profitability analysis to drive whether or not I should create bundles, or you talked about things we thought about back in the days, churn, right? What is my customer churn? How are they coming on? Insights, we used to look at customers and see how often had they flipped. You would change your offers based on the fact that I might identify that John Froelich, oh, that guy, he knows how to play the check game, right? He would, MCI would call, I'd get a check from them. Then AT&T would call, 3 weeks later with another check, and I'm like, oh, yay, I'll take checks all day. And in the beginning, of course, that was a challenge because we were giving a lot of money away. But we found out and got data on people who were playing that game, if you will, and certainly they do that virtually. And then we have the concept of revenue leakage, wherein, because we can't tie these relationships together, I'm missing revenue or not billing for revenue. Maybe you can talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, certainly revenue leakage is a big theme for convergent mediation. Anytime you handle revenue events, which is the purpose of the convergent mediation layer, then having extremely tight ability to audit and log all the events that come in and determine that they're all processed properly. And then on a different level, capturing invalid events and labeling them and routing them for further analysis is very important for operations to determine that systems are operating correctly, and in some cases also to flag things that look like they could potentially be some sort of service abuse or service fraud. And we
Right.
do all those things in convergent mediation for sure.
And when we think of this, and it'll lead to our next, the foundation for growth. But for a moment, the insights analysis, you talked about the fraud, we talked about revenue leakage. I'm going to take a layer down for a moment and talk about interfaces or integrations. As we think of all of these different locations or different places, I know the idea of Internet of Things, right? I have my car, right? Let's say that I have a particular service in my car. Maybe I get Apple Music in my car, but it's a subscription that I have more broadly. I have it on multiple devices. How can a tool like convergent mediation, I mean, I could have multiple devices or multiple users. If I sign up for a large software contract where I have 50 different users that can use varying levels of this and of the tool, and I'm on site and I'm looking at let's say I'm doing a CAD CAM, right, program, and I know I have access to certain things. How does something like mediation help me with that?
Yeah. I mean, certainly one of the things that mediation can do, and we see this functionality invoked frequently, is it has the ability to capture records in a stream and hold them for a brief period of time for purposes of, say, correlating events that come from different sources, or sequencing events. Sometimes if it under high load, say you can have an account created in a front-end e-commerce system, but then it's immediately made a change, and if those records come in out of order, the change before the creation, that could cause all kinds of problems in the downstream processing, but mediation can detect that. So in this space, being connected to all of the input channels on the front end is mediation has the flexibility and all the connectors and everything to be a part of all those channels. And it can be useful to do some level of correlation and keep some light state on recent events processed, so that if events start coming from multiple venues, multiple input sources for the same account, you can do some checking on that and you know, look at that in terms of, does this seem all normal, or is there any need to correlate these events, or even flag this as an account that is too active, so to speak.
Okay, great. So let's moving on to what I call the foundation for growth, right? We talked a bit about, you know, improving customer experience and why tying this data and how you can do that. We talked about just insights and analysis, but really a tool like Convergent Mediation is a foundation for growth and foundation. And I look at it as the idea of flexibility, scalability, and security. And I just threw some ideas up here. I know some things that we talked about when we got together previously, not just in the recent, but we've talked, you know, on and off for a couple of years now. You know, flexibility, you know, maybe you can address that in terms of, how does a tool like Convergent Mediation improve flexibility for companies?
Yeah. So absolutely, I do believe that convergent mediation is an example of having a unified platform, and that's an important aspect of convergent mediation. It can handle data that's being processed in batch or real time, or these bi-directional flows. This means that all of the revenue streams that are going into the back office can go through one platform. And there's a lot of advantage to that in terms of the ability to add new use cases. If there's new service streams that are getting turned up, they can be turned up in a phased way, and they're all going through one platform where they can be monitored and audited, and the transparency is there, and that just adds flexibility for. We see customers all the time that have established some business, and as they get a robust BRIM-based billing stream where they can bill for their consumption-based services, they have additional consumption-based services they want to bring there. And so being able to have a new use case to connect up a new data stream and start pushing that and do all that in the same framework is really a key part of that flexibility. Scalability is of course the same story. The scalability at the level of number of events is a technology sort of level, but scalability in terms of just being really flexible to accommodate new business models, where there will be some quite different processing and from everything from pricing to invoicing to the back end revenue recognition and revenue management. Mediation just assists that by quickly being able to get a hold of the data and deliver the business objects, the exact data stream in the right sequence that enables those back-end processes to run smoothly.
Yeah, and then of course security and privacy, right? So much of what we're seeing requires us to secure that data to ensure that we're meeting. You know, we all hear about GDPR and California privacy. That's interesting, but things like HIPAA or the Credit Privacy Act or information privacy. I know my wife is an attorney at a company, and information privacy is huge because you can get penalized thousands of dollars per person per incident. How does DigitalRoute help me with that?
Yeah, yeah, and of course those are super key requirements, as you say. They're very, very dominant. So certainly security is a multi-level issue and a solution level issue. From a mediation viewpoint, of course, we're all of the communication from the cloud where Convergent Mediation sits. It encrypts everything that's sent on the wire. It also has some of its own data masking capabilities. So filtering data, like if we're going to distribute data out to, say, an analysis element, and maybe certain sensitive data should not be a part of that analysis repository, that can be taken out in the mediation layer, whereas the full information is needed for, say, financial processing. And then lastly, one thing that I've seen is that sometimes there's encrypted data outside of the scope of the Convergent Mediation stack that's implemented, and being able to move encrypted data, binary data forms easily, and even to call into systems that will take your query and unencrypt and do the actual query into the data store, but then encrypt the answer so that the answer is never really seen at the Convergent Mediation layer.
And does that have implications, by the way, for things like, the technical, I guess the formal term for it is distributed ledger technology. We know it as blockchain. Is that something you're starting to see as well?
I have not personally encountered blockchain applications, but I see a lot of movement out there, and I definitely see organizations starting to lean toward blockchain ideas. So I think they're just over the horizon from our perspective.
Got it. So we have a couple of minutes, and again, Bert, this has been great. I know I've learned a lot. Hopefully the folks in the audience have. But the question I have for you is, so many times, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, right? A lot of our customers, or we did some analysis. There are competitors out there, whether it relates to, and I'll put them out. Dell Boomi, MuleSoft, Snowflake. There's a lot of competitors out there in this space. And the other big competitor I think you might run into is, hey, I'm a technology company. I can do this myself, right? What do you say to somebody who says, oh, you know what? I'm that guy. I can do this myself because I'm a software developer, or I'm a telco or a media company. Of course I can do this myself. Why DigitalRoute? Why Convergent Mediation?
Yeah, it's certainly a good question. There are many data management tools. There are many traditional tools that do a certain kind of data movement, ETLs that bulk load traditionally out of database sources, but now out of more places. There's enterprise service buses that are sort of designed under message paradigms. So all that's out there, and people use a lot of tools. The thing that I say about Convergent Mediation is that first of all, it was purpose built to deal with revenue events. There's a very rich set of overlapping features that are designed for exactly the type of data cleansing and highly auditable, high volume implementation of data capture and data transformation, specifically for the financial backend and specifically for the SAP world with connectors and so forth. But the other thing that I would say that is just indicative is that we have some of the largest high-tech companies in the world as customers, and not more than one of those customers have started out when they first acquired a BRIM solution. They wrote their own middleware layer, and and they had buildings full of the best software engineers you can imagine. But as their BRIM system grew, and they added more streams and more volume and more complexity around the data processing, they found that the requirements in this particular space grew fast enough that they abandoned their homegrown solutions and adopted convergent mediation, because they were in a position to fully recognize the value that mediation brought to them to handle these problems. So.
And of course, from a the concept that SAP uses and companies are using more and more with clean core, keep your core clean, and use best practices. A tool like this helps you do that, right?
Yes, absolutely. It is the best practices way to integrate a BRIM billing stack and all of the componentry associated with that in terms of the financial processes. Awesome. If you have extremely clean streams coming in, then it enables all those financial processes to execute smoothly and cleanly, and that has tremendous value over the full solution.
Okay, and this, I'm gonna wrap it up, but we always get asked, of course, as the guys who customer comes, well, how long does it take to do a RevRec solution, right? The answer is always depends, but it's not, it's not a moonshot. It's not a moonshot project. Do you have a response or ideas around typically, what do you see it takes to get something going here?
Yeah, of course, the answer is it depends. I mean,
right.
the complexity level can be anywhere from low to the moon. But that being said, part of what convergent mediation brings to the table is that getting data streams flowing in order to get the whole project moving is really a value. And mediation has a great record of being able to, because it's configuration driven and you have all this functionality out of the box, to get the project moving quickly within a few months. And so, we've seen a number of large projects be able to get to their first phase of being live in 6 months. And I'm talking about really, large scale projects. So that kind of speed is super fast.
And you mentioned that configuration, which makes me think of cloud. You have a cloud base of this product, right?
That's correct. There are 2 SKUs. There is a public cloud version of Convergent Mediation called Convergent Mediation Cloud Edition, okay. And then there's the private cloud edition, the traditional Convergent Mediation product.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're just about out of time, Bert. Thank you so much for your flexibility. I know I sprang this on you pretty late in the game, but as always, it was awesome to speak with you. I always learn something, so thank you for your time.
It's great to be here. Thank you, John.
And I want to thank everybody in the audience for hanging in there with us. I know there's a few of my Bramasol colleagues, but a bunch of others out there too who joined, and I want to thank all of you for joining. Should you have any additional questions, please reach out to myself, or you can reach out to Bert through DigitalRoute. And please do, we did record this, so feel free to check it out, download it, share it with your colleagues. I know that when we run into projects, whether they're US only, global, big, small, data is always, whether it's data mediation, data migration, data management, a big topic. So I encourage you to think more and do more with it. So thanks again, Bert. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to everybody again in the future. Thank you for joining us.